Greetings to those who watch below. For today's video, we're going to take a look at some paranormal encounters with some truly dark entities. But before we start, I'd like to say thank you to those who dwell below, an exclusive channel membership that gets you shoutouts at the start of every video. So thank you to Steffi Ray, Wicked Witch, Lisa Watts, Lefty Kim, M.A. Way, Julie B, Jess Blackhurting, Christina Groves, LT Punisher 666, Chris BLK Chris, and Canopsia. Also, if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, hitting that notification bell so that you never miss a video. Also, we're almost in the best month of the year, October, and I'll be winding up for some Halloween special videos, one of which I need your help with. I'm looking to do a subscriber special, so I need you guys to send me in your scariest paranormal encounters you've had, if you're lucky or unlucky enough to have had one. You can send me an email at matthewjt45@gmail.com, which is also in the description box as well. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. The Red Man Following My Family by Buttercup 4. About 9 months ago, I was getting ready for work. My husband and children had left to go to school. My daughter had taken the hairdryer to her room, so I was going upstairs to get it. I opened the door to the upstairs, and as I walked up the stairs, I smelt an odour like nothing I had ever smelt. It was almost metallic, but not quite. It was very pungent. I thought to myself that I needed to tell my daughter to get rid of that particular brand of incense. When I walked into her room, standing by the window was a tall thing. It was taller than her windows, dressed in what looked like a black cloak, and it turned around when I screamed. I could not move, and it just looked at me. It wasn't a malevolent look, it was more of a blank look. The scariest part was that it was a shiny red colour, with no hair. I ran, left the house and went to work without drying my hair at all. The scary part of this is that since my daughter was 2 years old, she has talked about the Red Man who scares her. She would cry in her bed at night because she said he was looking in her window. I brushed it off then, and she stopped talking about him after her grandmother passed away a year later. When she was 8, my husband and I were getting divorced, and she started talking about him again. She wasn't just talking about him though. She said there were several spirits who lived in her room, which was a completely different house in a different part of the state. She said her grandmother and my father were there, and they tried to protect us from the Red Man. There was a boy who was about her age who had a skateboard, and he was mean. She said the Red Man followed me around and made all the bad things that happened to me happen, and then he went away for a while. She talked about a time that she and I were driving on the interstate and a van ran us off the road. Our car almost flipped. She said that when she looked at the van, the Red Man was driving, and her grandmother was in the back seat of our car with her protecting us. Obviously, this scared me. She eventually stopped talking about him and hasn't mentioned him since. I didn't tell her what I saw in her bedroom that day, but she knew and asked me about it. Her room seems to be a hotbed of activity now. Her things get moved around, even while she's in the room, and it has been witnessed by her friends. She was gone for a week this summer and left her room clean. No one went upstairs while she was gone, and when she came home, her room was trashed. Clothes were all over the floor, and 2 posters were off of the wall. My husband is home during the day, and he says he hears things moving around up there all day, footsteps going up and down the stairs. We had to get rid of our dog because he was constantly barking at the door. My children will go upstairs in the day, but not after dark. I will not set foot up there at all. My kitchen is the room I fear at night. I can feel someone there, but when I turn on the light, nothing is there. I'm afraid to do much more than pray in the house, because if my father really is there, I don't want him to leave me. I don't think it's the house. I think it's us, or at least my daughter. She has never been afraid up until recently, and I'm not sure what to do with it. She thinks she is crazy. She spent a week as an inpatient at a psychiatric hospital due to a psychotic episode. She was hearing voices. She heard people calling her name constantly. I'm starting to think that she wasn't psychotic, but hearing spirits who were trying to communicate with her. Even her psychiatrist doesn't think this is schizophrenia. She wasn't medicated before she started hearing it, and even now on medication, she still hears it. Since then, she has become very involved in our church youth group, and her moods have improved rapidly. The voices remain. Four-Legged Dark Creature by C. Felix 1422. During my senior year of high school, I would normally sleep real late into the night. Since my room was on the second floor, it provided me with the privacy I needed, without anyone disturbing my conversations. I was a teenager who enjoyed talking on the phone with friends, and calling from bed was the perfect time to gossip. My younger brother at the time slept upstairs as well, but he slept in the room next to mine. One particular weekend night, which has haunted me to this day, I was in bed talking on the phone with a friend. Everyone in the household was asleep, since it was late into the night. There was enough moonlight coming into my room that I could make out the outlines of the objects that were in my room. My bed at the time was in the corner of one of the walls, while the door was right in front of my bed. I was resting my eyes for a while during my phone conversation when I had an uneasy feeling. When I opened my eyes, I saw a shadow standing next to my bed. Even with the moonlight, the shadow was dark, and I could not make out any features. It just stood there, while I felt my body freeze in horror. My gut told me it was a malevolent entity. After staring at this figure for what seemed like an eternity, the entity shifted in shape. I saw it transform from a two-legged shadow to a four-legged dark creature with a tail. When it did this, it crawled on my ceiling near my bed. It is at this moment that I threw my phone, my friend was still on the line, jumped from the bed and went for my light switch next to the door. I did not look back at the creature out of fear. When I turned on the light, it turned off again in a matter of seconds. I tried to turn it on again, and it turned off again. I felt my adrenaline going after I failed to keep the light on, so I threw open my door, turned on the light from the hallway, and frantically knocked on my brother's door. I woke up my brother that night, and although angry as soon as he opened the door, he looked concerned when he saw me crying and shaking terribly. I told him what I had seen in my room, and I quickly tailed behind him to check out my room and retrieve my phone. When he turned on the light from my room, the light stayed on. We did not find anything, but my phone was still on the bed. Apparently, my friend had tried to call me several times after I cut our conversation short, due to what I had seen. My brother believed me, and he wanted to tell my parents then and there. It was late in the night, and I did not want to wake them. I also knew they were not going to believe me, because they are hardcore skeptics. I realized that they were just going to dismiss it as a dream. I told my brother not to say anything, and I ended up staying in my brother's room that night. I could not sleep at all that night, due to fear and due to the questioning of what exactly that thing was. The next morning, my brother and I went downstairs for breakfast. Over breakfast, my brother tells my parents what had happened the night before. I was ashamed and embarrassed because I did not want to hear my parents lecturing me about dreaming or imagining things. When my brother finished telling my parents what had happened, they both stayed quiet. My dad finally asked me if I was sure of what I had seen, and if I was positive I was not dreaming. I showed him my phone, and I told him I was wide awake and that I had been on the phone talking to my friend. My brother also verified that he had woken up to me crying uncontrollably. My dad then told me that he will leave a video camera in my room that very night to see if he saw anything unusual during the night. The next day after the recording, my dad handed me the video and told me to watch it. I never did. I realized that if I saw something I did not want to see there, I would not be able to live in that room with peace. To this day, that video is still in the bookshelf. My dad told me he watched half of it, and then he got tired of seeing nothing, so turned it off. As for myself, I never want to see that video. It brings back horrific memories. 2 days after my experience, I ended up telling my aunt, who I trusted and I knew would believe me. She took me to a church, had my cross necklace that I always wore blessed, and told the priest about my experiences. The priest told me that just as there are good beings in this world, there are also beings that were evil. He told me that what I had seen was evil, and he asked for permission to bless the house. Since it is the home of my parents, I called my dad and asked if a priest could come bless the house. My dad was infuriated, and he told me he did not want anyone in the house. As I stated before, my dad is a skeptic, and he thought I was taking my imagination and running with it. After my aunt heard my dad's decision, she looked at me and saw how upset I was. She asked the priest for holy water, and she is the one who came back home with me and blessed the house. The blessing helped for about 3 months. Since then, I still see or hear strange things when I visit my family in Illinois. After the experience happened, I did not sleep in that room for over a year. I would sleep in the living room. When I left for college the year after, I was hardly at my parents' home. I had a job on campus, so I stayed in the dorms as much as I could. When I do visit, I still sleep in the living room, or have someone else sleep with me in the old room with the light on. I made the mistake of sleeping by myself 2 years after the experience in the old room, and I regretted it instantly. That, of course, is another experience for another time. The Evil Michelin Man by Realistic. I was about 4 years old when it first happened. We were staying at our family home, which was quite sprawling, surrounded by a spacious garden and big ponds. There were a lot of people staying there at the time, including my parents and my brother, uncles and aunts, my cousins, my grandma, some other relatives, and a host of servants, cooks, and gardeners. Everyone used to hang around with their groups. My mum and my aunts, or my uncles with my father. My older cousins formed a racket team together, and my younger cousins had a secret playhouse where they spent all their waking hours. Since I was the youngest, I was a maverick, and spent most of the time playing by myself, in the morning and in the evening, with the servants telling me stories in the kitchen. One evening, I was in the kitchen as usual, sitting next to my nurse. I still remember everyone talking and laughing and having a good time. It was then dusk outside, and one could see the ghostly outlines of the trees in the garden in a hazy manner. The kitchen had 2 doors, one leading to the dining hall and the other into the back garden. Both the doors were open at the time. It was winter, and I was wearing a woolen cap. I was sitting just inside the door leading off to the dining hall, facing the kitchen, when all of a sudden my cap was snatched off my head and thrown to the ground next to me. I quickly looked around and did not see anyone in the hall. I turned around and asked the servants who had done that, and they just laughed and went on with their chores. After picking up my cap, I turned back again to the hall to catch the culprit. The dining hall had 2 floor-length windows, through which one could see the passage beyond clearly. When I was peering round, I saw a big black shadow hurry past the windows on all 4s. It looked fleetingly like a huge black dog, but our German Shepherd had died a few months back. Being quite young, I quickly forgot the incident and started pestering my nurse to tell me a story. Suddenly, I saw a movement from the door to the garden, and I looked up to see who it was. What I saw is still beyond my comprehension. Standing at the door was a man who was easily 6.5 feet tall. He was a dead ringer for the Michelin Man, only he didn't look so friendly. And unlike the Michelin Man, his body was totally green. He had luminous green eyes, his mouth snarled in menace, and his right hand was raised holding a big green sickle with which he was menacing me with. I looked around to see if anyone else had seen it, and nobody gave any indication of doing so. I suddenly felt lightheaded, and for the first time in my life, I fainted. I woke up to see my mother's anxious face. By the time the doctor made a house call, I was running an extremely high fever of 105 degrees. After his examinations, he said that something had terrified me and caused my fever. Needless to say, all the servants got a good round of scolding for scaring me, though they denied doing so. The next incident happened during springtime, about 3 to 4 months later, and at dusk as usual. A cousin and I were netting tadpoles from a small waterhole close to the kitchen, when something made me look up to the second story of the house. I saw the same man standing at one of the windows and threatening me with the same gesture and sickle. As usual, I fainted and woke up to a high fever. The third and last time I saw this being was about 5 to 6 months later. We were going on vacation and had to start by 4:30 a.m. I was up and ready by 4 and went out to the garden with my dad. We were standing next to the pond in the hazy early morning light. That was when I saw it at the other side of the pond, looking at me and threatening with the sickle. I looked at my dad to see if he had seen anything, since he was also looking at the far side. I looked back and saw it walking away towards the boundary wall. It gave me one sneering look and just vanished into the wall. Strangely, I did not faint. That was the last time I saw it. In fact, I had forgotten the whole series of incidents until it all came back to me in my mid-30s. I was leafing through an auto magazine and saw a Michelin ad with the Michelin Man. I was with my family at this time, and when I related the above incidents, I was absolutely sure that I would be laughed at. Strangely enough, they all believed me, and not even one snort was heard. I know the whole story sounds quite absurd. It is also strange that I could remember so much since I was quite young. But somehow this incident, which I had forgotten for about 30 years, came rushing back to me only because I saw a picture of the Michelin Man in a magazine. I had never seen the ad before, since I live in India, and Michelin didn't have a presence here then. My most horrifying, unforgettable week, by Polexia. I'd moved to Texas to live with my mom during my first pregnancy, since I had no support system in my hometown. I lived with her for about a year before the issues started up. It was around 9 o'clock at night, and my mum, stepfather and I were sitting at the dining table, and I had my 6-month-old son on my lap. He was refusing to sleep, and I didn't want him to wake my step-siblings by fussing loudly in my room. So I figured him being with me would help calm him enough to sleep. All of a sudden, he just froze in my lap, stiff as a board, and stared at the corner of the living room. I noticed he wasn't fidgeting anymore and followed his gaze, but nothing was there. It was just an empty corner. I got my mum's attention, and she looked at the corner as well, but she didn't see anything there either. My son started pointing at the corner, crying quietly. My mum walked across the room, ran her hand around the corner, but felt nothing and came back. Within moments, my son stopped staring and leaned against my chest, falling asleep in a few minutes. I laid him down in his crib, turned on some music, and left him there until I was ready to go to bed myself. I thought nothing of the shadows I saw moving in the hall through the crack between the bottom of my door and the floor, assuming they were just my stepfather checking on his kids. Only 2 days later, it happened again, but this time my son's crying wasn't quiet. My mum checked the corner, my son finally fell asleep still sniffling, and I put him to bed. I went out onto the back deck for a cigarette at 10:30 before I headed to bed. When I came back inside, my stepfather, Dale, stopped me and said, "He's okay, but who's that woman?" "What woman?" I asked, because I couldn't see anyone near my room, and there were no new photos on the walls. "The woman there in front of your door. She's got short curly hair, and she's short and skinny. She's wearing a button-down shirt and a long jean skirt." "Dale, you're drunk. There's no one there," I said, but I knew the description. It was exactly how my grandmother looked when she was younger, and he had never met her. She'd died almost 2 years before this point. I chalked it up to him, as I said, being drunk, and remembering a description my mother might have told him. The next 3 nights went much the same. We lost the house within the next month, due to my stepfather not being able to work because of a car accident. So my mum and Dale took the kids an hour and a half away to stay with Dale's parents, while my son and I stayed behind to finish packing the house up. It was the easiest for all of us. Mum and Dale could focus on the kids and finding a new place, and I could focus on my son and packing without having to deal with the fuss that comes from 3 kids all close in age and reaching the point where they rarely get along. The first night was fine. I got the kids' belongings in boxes, and half of my room was organised and ready to be packed up. The second evening is when it started. I'd just laid my son down in bed, got in the Disney station started up for him, and shut the door behind me, when I heard the whispering. I opened the door again, but all I could hear was the colours of the wind. The whispering got louder when I reached the living room, and it seemed to come from what was my mum's room. I hurriedly shut the door, turned on Alfred Hitchcock Presents on the TV, and forced myself to focus on packing things up. I eventually fell asleep on the couch around 1 a.m. The next night, I was smoking before bed, and on the phone with my friend we'll call Brian, talking about nothing in particular. I fell silent as I realised there were 4 dark figures standing in my backyard, halfway between the deck and the back fence. They didn't move at all, but they were there. I took a picture on my phone, but the photo didn't show anything. I went inside, made sure all doors and windows were locked, and broke my own rule of smoking in the house. I didn't go back outside until the sun was up. Once I finally fell asleep, it didn't last long. I woke up to the feeling of someone watching me, the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up, and goosebumps all over my body. The music came the following night. Big band 50s style music, crackling and fluctuating in volume and eerily haunting, coming from my mum's room. My son wouldn't sleep in our room, screaming every time I tried to lay him down. So I made him a bed of extra comforters on the living room floor. He was asleep within minutes. I ignored the music as much as I could, but it was difficult. It played for 3 hours before suddenly cutting off, leaving the house in silence. The figures in the backyard were there again. The 5th night I stayed in that house alone was also the final night. I'd become accustomed to the haunting strains of old music, the terrifying shadows in the backyard, the faint whispering, even the feeling of something being in the house with my son and me. But nothing could have ever prepared me for what happened that final night. I'd made sure the dishes were washed and put away, laundry run through the machines, folded and put away in boxes, and trash bagged up and ready to be put in the cans outside. I fell asleep to the sound of Alfred Hitchcock talking on the TV, the 50s music coming from my mum's room, and soft voices speaking too fast and too quietly for me to understand. I woke up in less than 2 hours, unable to breathe. It felt like I was being strangled, thick fingers around my throat, and a harsh growling breathing in my ears. I was sobbing, my son was screaming, and I couldn't move. The sensation was gone as suddenly as it came, and I stumbled to my feet, picked up my son to comfort him, and headed into the kitchen for a drink. I know I'd put away every single dish and piece of silverware, because I sent my mum a picture when I was done, with the caption, "See Mum, I'm not being lazy." But there, on the island counter, was our largest butcher knife, and as I stared at it, it started almost vibrating, wiggling across the countertop before rising about an inch in the air. I screamed and ran back into the living room, stuffing my son rather haphazardly into his car seat before running to my room to gather up clothes and drag his mattress from the crib. I shoved bottles and formula and diapers and wipes into a large duffel bag and clothes into my book bag and left it by the door while I ran my son out to the car as a guttural laugh echoed through the house. I nearly wrecked the car trying to reverse out of our driveway. I called my mum as I drove toward where they were staying, asking for directions and crying too hard to explain what had happened. My phone died before I was even halfway there. Dale's mum didn't believe me when I got there, but I know Mum and Dale did. They'd seen the benevolent stuff, the less frightening occurrences, and so it wasn't a far leap from just presences to what I experienced that night. When I went to show them pictures and let them listen to the audio of the music from their room, everything was gone. Not just deleted or silent audio clips, but the data wasn't there at all. Last I heard, the people who moved in after us left the house in as much of a hurry as I did that night, and the neighbour across the street went in to clean it up, and probably take things that were left behind, but couldn't get past the front door before she felt like she was being strangled. Now, the land has an enormous crack through it, and the house was in ruins for over a year before the city decided to tear it down. Hi there guys, thank you so much for listening to today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. These darker stories are both terrifying and absolutely fascinating to me, and I really hope you find them the same. Remember, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, making sure to hit that notification bell so that you never miss a video. And while you're clicking subscribe, make sure to do the same over at the creepypasta.com official YouTube channel. So, until next time, sleep tight.